All right, everybody. Well, welcome to today's HubSpot user group. We are so thrilled to have you guys here. Today, we are going to be talking about mastering the Salesforce HubSpot integration and how to make the integration not suck. Right. So we got a few welcome announcements that we got to go through with me and Brandon. We're going to be mastering the Salesforce with Tate. And then we've got some Q&A coming up following that. And then if we've got time at the end, Brandon and myself, we might go over a couple cool updates that we've seen HubSpot recently launch or update. And then we'll do any other final Q&A and wrap-ups. We're going to try to get out of here within about an hour. If we need to stay a little bit longer, we can as well. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Darren Burnson, but I do go by Doc, and I'm the owner and head coach here at Burnco Media, and I've been a HubSpot certified partner since 2013, and along with Brandon, a Salt Lake City HubSpot user group co-leader since 2015. Cannot even believe it's been this long, Brandon, but I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
I think it's actually 2014 when we started this thing. Apologize if I'm breaking up. My internet's being problematic, but I'm Brandon Carter. I am, again, HubSpot user group of Salt Lake City, co-founder, co-leader with Doc since, I think, 2014. He thinks 2015, but somewhere in that neighborhood. I am the marketing director at Promevo.
Great. All right.
So whether that's all your Google needs, yada, yada. Oh, sorry, my internet. Let me hop on my HubSpot.
Sorry, you cut off.
Good to meet everybody.
I thought you were done. I apologize.
It's my internet.
All right.
Sorry.
So,
all right.
Anyway,
I've said enough. Proceed.
Whether this is your first time attending a HubSpot user group event with us, or you've been to one or many in the past, we are super excited to have you here with us today. Just so you guys know, we are planning on hosting at least 3 more events this year, and most likely they will all be online. We might get a couple in person going as well, but here are the dates. We're looking at May 8th, August 7th, and November 13th. And like I said earlier, before we went live, we are always looking for potential speakers for these HUG events. So if you've got something that you'd like to share with our group, like Tate is today, shoot us a note and let's chat. Lastly, if anybody here has any specific topics that you would like us to cover in a future event, go ahead and throw the topics in the chat or reach out to myself or Brandon directly, and we can look at covering that topic, or even, like I said, drop it in the chat and we can look at having that in a future event. And then now, Brandon, hopefully your mic works. Let's have you come on and talk about our lunch and learns.
Nothing worse than getting on to talk after your internet has already bugged out. But hopefully you guys can hear. So as I mentioned to those of you that were here before we got started, we have small groups every month. They're very different than this. Like, these meetings are large. HUG full group meetings are primarily, us getting up here and sort of like teaching or going over kind of a predetermined topic. These are more like show and tell. They are a small group. They're generally 10 to maybe 15 people in a small group talking about HubSpot specific things that like are affecting them in their day-to-day jobs. And that's both bringing to the table with their problems. So you bring a problem, but you also bring your expertise. It's a judgment-free zone. There's no bad questions. There's no dumb questions. Whether you are a beginner or a long-time HubSpot user, there's something here for you. But again, we keep it limited for specific reasons, so that it's a little bit intimate and that you can really, like, everyone kind of gets to bring their specific problem or their specific topic to the table. Like I mentioned, for me, it's primarily a way to just sort of steal ideas and get better at the things that I build and the things that I do within the platform. So, it'll be February 23rd. We'll send out a link, and we'll also post it to our social channels, like our LinkedIn profiles, the Facebook page, yada, yada. So, be sure to sign up and join. If there's enough demand, we'll start a couple of them. But yeah, those are my favorite events, and hope to see you there.
Yeah, and I'll also add too, just from as a reward or as a enticement for you guys for being with us here today, you guys are going to get first dibs. So by the time we're done with today's show, if you stick around to the end, I'm going to drop the link in and let you guys register first. And then who knows, maybe this fills it up and we don't even do a public announcement. So watch for that towards the end today. All right. So lastly, we are going to be recording today's event. We obviously are right now. And I will be posting this on the main page that you registered on later today or early tomorrow. And I think Brandon's also going to be working on a recap, and we'll let you know via email when that is ready. Yeah, so that's it. And now I'm excited to announce today's guest presenter, Tate Stone. Tate is the founder of RevBlack, a Salesforce and HubSpot consulting partner that specializes in RevOps projects for companies using both tools. Based out of the beautiful Heber Valley, Tate has used both HubSpot and Salesforce his entire career. In 2022, he finally decided to start his own thing and focus on this particular niche. Awesome. So let's go ahead and welcome Tate.
All right, great. Yeah, thank you for that warm introduction. You want me to share my screen?
Yep, go ahead and share your screen and get it going.
Let me go ahead and turn that on. 1 second. All right. Sorry, should have had that ready to go. 1 second. All right. I think we're good. There we go. Okay. We got the slideshow. Is that what we're seeing? Oh, looks like we lost Doc too. Someone in the chat want to give me a yes or no if we're good? Everybody can hear me? Perfect. Okay, cool. So we'll keep going. We're, I guess, orphans without Doc and without Brandon, but that's all right. So like the introduction Doc said, my name is Tate. I've been working with HubSpot and Salesforce my whole career. I actually worked with Brandon. We worked together at a startup in Lehigh called grow.com. That was like a really good experience working with Brandon. Got to see a lot of his expertise and learn directly from him. Obviously, since then, he's gone on to do bigger and better things. And it's been fun to sort of see our career paths and growing. So I guess more of the formal introduction is that, oh, geez, here we go. There's the slide about me. Like I said, I've been working with Salesforce and HubSpot the last 8 years. And back in those days, using Salesforce and HubSpot together was sort of it wasn't super common. And anytime we would tell somebody, hey, we're using both, we would always get a weird look. So ever since then, I've had this chip on my shoulder and like defended the use case for having both. And I'm one of the few people that whenever you see those fights on LinkedIn on like, oh, I like Salesforce, I like HubSpot. Like, I'm a big fan of both. I think there's a lot of value that both provide, and there's just different circumstances and situations that would require one or over the other. We'll talk maybe a little bit more about what those might be later on, especially if you're looking at a migration or maybe sticking with both or whatever. So anyway, back in 2022, finally decided that it was time to go ahead and start my own company. And I just saw so much demand for this particular integration. It became more and more popular as maybe Salesforce was like the legacy CRM, and folks are starting to say, hey, I really like what Marketing Hub does. I hate Pardot. I don't want to use, maybe some other sales engagement tool. I want to use, HubSpot, Sales Hub or whatever. And so the idea of our company was, hey, we'll focus on folks that use both and kind of provide more of a RevOps perspective as opposed to being just a consultant of one or the other. And that's a fairly common thing that we see. Kind of my competitors tend to just be one or the other, and they'll have like super strong and biased opinions one way or the other, which is okay. But that's been kind of how we went about doing it. So we've got certifications in both, we're experienced in both, and we love working in both. The next piece, I guess, on why I feel strongly about this and why hopefully you guys do too, is this may be a totally fake stat, but my partner rep at HubSpot has said multiple times that, hey, at least 40% of the customers are also using Salesforce. That may just be within a certain segment that they're working in, but that is a very high number. I expect that'll change over time, but that means that nearly half of folks who are using HubSpot are also having to figure out what to do about Salesforce and how to use that integration in those tools together. So that's kind of the idea. And maybe you guys are in a similar situation. Maybe you've seen something different, but it seems to be increasingly common. The next I guess, piece is I want to talk about it. Like what are the use cases, right? So when are people going to be using both tools together or potentially separately? I sort of touched on it, but the idea I typically see is when you're using both is that you have Salesforce as your core CRM. Maybe finance is a big part of the decision on which CRM you're going to use. And, maybe that needs to integrate with some legacy ERP tool, or maybe it's just what we've always used, or maybe, hey, I need to capture product data from Mixpanel and pipe it in, and Salesforce is the one that we've got to use, whatever. In those situations, Salesforce is a great CRM, but it quickly becomes apparent that it's lacking in features when it comes to, let's say, sales engagement and marketing automation. So Salesforce does offer a tool called, they used to call it high velocity sales. It's now called sales engagement. They also offer a tool called Pardot. They have like Salesforce Marketing Cloud as well. Especially Pardot is really a horrible product. No offense if you're a big fan, but it really, it's embarrassing almost when you compare it to what HubSpot Marketing Hub can do. And again, I'm a Salesforce partner, big fan, but that to me is like, I'm surprised they would, even with like a straight face, try to sell that to somebody. Especially when you look at like what Marketo can do and what HubSpot obviously can do. And on the other side, right, maybe you're like needing some sort of a sales engagement tool. Out of the box Salesforce, it's just bad. Well, out of the box Salesforce doesn't have anything. If you just use Sales Cloud, if you go ahead and buy their add-on for sales engagement or high velocity sales, you will get some basic, they call them cadences, but it's like a basic sequencing tool of like, hey, send the email, send the task, whatever. But simple things on like, hey, how is this sequence, or cadence doing compared to this one? It's very difficult to report on. And even just managing the back end of it, it's messy, it's complicated. It doesn't even integrate super well with Salesforce itself. So let's say you're like, hey, if they get to step 5 in a cadence, and then we want to have some field get automatically updated in Salesforce, you can't even use like Salesforce's core flows, their automation tool. You have to sort of build these weird janky workarounds if your trigger is based on their sales engagement tool. So because of all of that, I see a lot of interest in people, especially on, people who are running a marketing team, people who are running, a BDR, SDR team, or even just a regular sales team. They're saying, hey, Salesforce as a CRM is fine. It's got the data we need, but the tools to actually use the CRM aren't quite what we would hope for. And that's where I see the most common use case of, we'll keep Salesforce, but now we're going to use Marketing Hub. We're going to use Sales Hub. And then you've got to make sure that that data makes it back into Salesforce in a usable way. If you don't do it, it may be worse than just sticking with the crappy tools. And you could end up with a situation where, you don't have a single source of truth when it comes to reporting. Your automation is contradicting each other out of both tools. Most of the people that call us are in pretty bad shape, or they're feeling really frustrated about how things are kind of where things are at in their current state. And it doesn't have to be that way. So the next, I guess, piece I wanted to mention is this particular slide. Oh, how do I do this? It has a transition and I'm not sure how to do it. Oh, there we go. This is how a lot of people feel when they first try to integrate Salesforce and HubSpot. And our goal is to get it to this. To say like these two tools, like as much as people love to fight about them online, as much as people like to say one is better than the other, whatever, there is a world in which these two tools can work together and you can actually get the very best of both worlds. It does take some work, but it's absolutely possible. And so I think today what we're hoping to accomplish is we can talk about the differences. We can talk about a bunch of different things. But at the end of the day, the whole reason my business exists, the whole reason I'm doing all this is to help make sure that these two tools work well together. And from an overall RevOps perspective, you have like all of your marketing, CS, and sales needs, they're getting addressed by these two tools. All right, let's talk about differences. And again, throw anything in the chat if you want to call something out. I'll just do kind of a high level. If you want to get more detailed, I'm happy to do so. But kind of at a high level, Salesforce and HubSpot, they definitely are competitors. They definitely go up against each other and all sorts of, maybe different solutions that they offer or features that they may provide. But there are some key differences. I think the first one to call out is like the actual usability and like the core focus. So, Doc and Brandon were around from the beginning when it came to HubSpot. And one of the things that I think HubSpot really tried to do the entire way through is make sure that their tool was easy to use. Salesforce, when you log in, the very first thing you see is, probably a bunch of fields, and it's probably fairly messy. There's probably a million places to look. Your eyes jumping all over the page. When you first log into HubSpot, it's much more of like a well-designed, intentional experience. And that shows not just in how the UI looks, but in how the tool kind of functions. Now, sometimes people like to bring up the idea of, iPhone versus, Samsung or Google or whoever. One, argument is that HubSpot is maybe more like Apple, where it's like, hey, it's well-designed. It's got basically what I need. And then on the flip side, you've got the other folks saying, oh, well, that's fine, but I really need these specific customizations. I really need it to look this way. And I don't really care if it's, perfectly designed or extremely user-friendly. And I think that's a fairly good analogy to make between the two tools. So, overall, if you want Salesforce to have this super great, like custom feel or just really easy to use, it will require you to kind of make that yourself. It will require you to build screen flows and, custom, you can use Visualforce or whatever you need to make sure that your lightning record pages look and feel exactly how you'd like. On the HubSpot side, a lot of that is kind of out of the box. It's way more intuitive. Okay. Next point is when it comes to like customization, scalability. I guess I've already like hit on customization a bit, but the scalability part has always been kind of the Salesforce users, gotcha for HubSpot. They love to point that out. And I'll say it has, even in like the last 6 months, but especially over the last 3 to 4 years, HubSpot has made like humongous progress, huge strides towards the scalability side. There's a period of time where you had very limited use of custom objects inside of HubSpot, very limited capabilities in terms of like how you could customize things. And the scalability argument always as well with Salesforce, right? We could roll that out and, our enterprise level customers use that. And, you could have 5,000 users in a single Salesforce org, and it's going to work just fine. It's going to be whatever. HubSpot is catching up. And in some ways you could argue it's on par with Salesforce. Again, it depends on the exact needs. I would say the only difference there is if you're looking to bring in like a lot of really custom, like let's say product usage data or something like that, I probably would still give that win to Salesforce. But overall, in terms of like managing a user experience with complex permissions and things like that, they're both really in a good spot today. Pricing and cost of ownership. This is one where I would say you probably give the win to HubSpot. In terms of pricing, it's generally cheaper than Salesforce, kind of at their respective or like their like comparable plans. HubSpot tends to typically be a bit cheaper. And then in that ongoing cost of ownership, how much is it going to cost me to keep using this tool? HubSpot is typically cheaper. And I even say that in my own business. If it is a HubSpot only shop that we're going to work with, like my prices are just lower. If it is Salesforce only or Salesforce with HubSpot, prices are higher. It just requires a certain level of complexity with Salesforce that demands kind of a higher rate. So just as you're trying to figure out which tool do I use, how are we going to handle this? There are additional costs with Salesforce. Not to say that HubSpot's not going to get expensive if you set it up a certain way, but overall, generally speaking, HubSpot is probably going to be a bit cheaper for you. Functionality and improvements. This is one where I kind of talked a little bit already about, some of Salesforce weaknesses. As a core CRM, Salesforce is great, and you can really build anything you need. If the functionality isn't there out of the box, like I have yet to come across a request from a client that we were not able to do in Salesforce. It may be complicated, it may be complex, it may require, custom code, but I have not yet been unable to do something in Salesforce. HubSpot is a little bit more locked down. It's a little bit more difficult to kind of pry open the hood and build custom, backend scripts that can run and do this. Not to say that's impossible, and OpsHub gives you tons of great possibilities. What I would say is, again, HubSpot has focused on making that more accessible and easier to use right out of the gate. And then on the improvements, I think that's the other one to call out. HubSpot has been innovating and improving their product at a rate that I have just not seen. Like, not just within CRM tools, but I would say in SaaS tools, like across the board. I am extremely impressed with the rate of improvement with HubSpot. And I think that's also why you see a lot of people who maybe aren't super up to date on, the CRM wars, and they'll just quickly write off HubSpot because it's like, how could they possibly have scaled that quickly and that well in such a short amount of time? It took Salesforce, Salesforce, I think, was founded in 1999. Someone can fact check me on that. So let's say it took them 25 years to get where they're at. I think HubSpot was founded like 2006, but really started going after, like, we want to be a world-class CRM, let's say a decade ago or even less. And so that rate of improvement has just always impresses me. And if you go into your HubSpot portal and you go click on, the product updates tab, and then you look at beta, there are so many cool things that you can, enroll your account in today. And Salesforce, again, they obviously are improving their product and making it better over time, but they do that 3 times a year. And it's just not typically at that same rate of improvement. The last point when it comes to, like, hey, which CRM should we use? The fight everyone loves to have, it really matters who's using it. If you are using this for your marketing and like inside sales team, you have just kind of a simple setup or more of a traditional setup, HubSpot is going to do just fine 99% of the time. If you have a semi-complex business model and there are maybe requirements from other departments, like let's say accounting or finance or product, and they are going to be using the CRM as well, and they have very specific use cases, that's probably the main reason I see people stick with Salesforce, even if they love HubSpot. It's just because it serves a larger purpose. And I would say, again, Salesforce probably does have that. They really have built something that is so ubiquitous, so well used. There's all sorts of apps built on top of it that does kind of protect and help Salesforce a bit. But if you have a situation where it's like, hey, we're just coming up, we just need a core CRM, it's mostly for our marketing, sales, maybe CS team, maybe the services side, you can get away with HubSpot. And yes, there will be some random weird things that a Salesforce user will say, how come I cannot do this? But 98% of what you need will be in HubSpot. All right. I probably should pick up the pace. Let's get going here. And I think the point of this presentation, like what I want to make sure that we all take away, is there is a way to get the best out of both worlds. You don't have to be one side or the other. And there are, strengths and weaknesses of both tools. If you don't do this intentionally, if you don't try and integrate them, in a smart way, you'll end up getting the worst of both worlds. But if you're focused on what you're trying to do, or focused on, you have a clear goal, clear end in mind, and you have a plan in place, you really can get the best of both worlds. Like one quick example, in HubSpot, if you build a workflow, you have that option before you turn it on to say, hey, just turn this on for net new, or go ahead and turn this on for all contacts or companies or whatever that currently meet this criteria. Salesforce does not have that same functionality. So their flow machine, or I guess, what would you call it? Their automation engine, it is super robust. It is fantastic. I use it all the time. I love it. But it does not have that one feature. So a lot of the time in Salesforce, I find myself saying, I'm going to build the automation in Salesforce because I really want it to work that way. But when I turn it on, I will then have to go, build a report or use SLCHUG to get that list of records that I need to update, the historical ones. And then I'll have to run that through Data Loader or Import Wizard or whatever and kind of manually flip those. On the HubSpot side, you don't have to do that. And so I'll talk about this a little bit later. It's fantastic when you have both integrated and the fields you need to update are mapped, because then I can just build a one-time workflow in HubSpot. It takes me 2 seconds. I turn it on, I hit yes, turn it clean up all my historical records. Then I can turn it off, delete it, whatever, and that will sync all those changes to Salesforce. And my job, instead of an hour, is now 5 minutes. So anyway, going back to what I was trying to say is if you're smart about it, you can get the best of both worlds. First one is be open-minded. And most people are not. Like almost everybody we talk to they had this personal preference for Salesforce or for HubSpot because it was the tool they used their last job, or it's what they initially used, or whatever. And in their minds, no matter what, the other tool sucks, my tool's awesome. If you can set that aside and genuinely try to say, I'm open to learning, I'm open to seeing the options of both, those are the situations where we see our clients absolutely thrive, where you're not focused and trying to undermine the other tool or trying to make it not work. The second one is understanding the data model. And this is where we could spend forever and get super wonky and nerdy, but Salesforce and HubSpot do not have like a one-to-one data model. What I mean by that is a lead in HubSpot, let's say the new lead functionality, it is not the same thing as a lead in Salesforce. They have the same name. They are not the same thing. If you think they are the same thing and then you try to map things and integrate, you're going to get frustrated really quick. Campaigns in HubSpot and campaigns in Salesforce are not the same thing. They do they have the same name and they sort of are related to marketing, but they are not a one-to-one sort of data model. Companies and accounts, yes, those map one-to-one. Contacts and contacts, those map one-to-one. Contacts and leads, sort of, right? And so we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the traditional Salesforce model calls for leads, then contacts, and then those will get converted into accounts and opportunities as well. So that's like another one you just have to be super aware of, is like, hey, in my mind, an event record is this in Salesforce. But if I go into HubSpot, actually it is not the same thing. And that may be just one other example to call out. In Salesforce, if you have a record, if it's an event record, if it is an email, if it's this or whatever, you can add custom objects or custom fields to it. You can enroll it in flows. You can do all sorts of stuff with it. HubSpot is a bit more limited on, let's say, activity data. Like, you cannot build a super intuitive report of meetings. You can have calls, but meetings get a little bit tricky. You can't add like a custom property onto the meeting object. You can't, use it in automation maybe the way you would initially anticipate, like you might be able to in Salesforce. Okay, the next key for success. How do you get the best out of both worlds? You've got to get into the weeds. You turn on that integration. You go into HubSpot, you hit, the marketplace, you hit Salesforce, you hit install. It's actually fairly easy to turn on by yourself. If you do not pay attention to what you're doing, you will end up in a world of hurt. And part of it has to do with when you hit on, HubSpot is trying to be super helpful. One example is it'll just automatically map every field that it possibly can find from Salesforce into HubSpot. Maybe you don't want those mapped. And it will also just automatically pick a sync rule for you. So maybe you're like, hey, this always has to just default to the Salesforce value. If you just turn that on and you're not careful, it will like start overriding data that should never be overridden. So getting into the weeds, you can't just like close your eyes and turn it on and hope it works out. Those are the ones that end in total like dumpster fires. You've got to make sure you understand it and go slow if you have to. It's really not an integration worth rushing. The next one is you've got to define roles for each tool. If you've got them turned on, you need to realize you now have an automation engine in HubSpot and you have an automation engine in Salesforce. What if somebody builds a flow in Salesforce that contradicts a workflow that somebody else built in HubSpot? Or what if they have the same trigger and do very different things? Or what if one flow in Salesforce triggers a workflow in HubSpot, which then triggers that same flow? And you build this infinite automation loop. I've done that myself, so I know why you really shouldn't do it. The point is, you need to make a decision. Hey, we're going to use HubSpot for lead capture, for email marketing. We're going to use it for like maybe lead distribution, and we will not put any other automation or reports or anything else in HubSpot except for those. Or you could maybe say it the reverse way. Hey, Salesforce, we are going to put all of the lead distribution, or let's say contact distribution automation in Salesforce and then sync it. And that will be sort of our source of truth. You can't just say like, oh, well, today I feel like building it in HubSpot. Tomorrow I feel like building it in Salesforce. You have to be super clear on what each tool is going to do for you, and then make sure the rest of the team sticks to that. The one other thing though is you may not be the admin over the entire company for both tools. And it's very common to have like a HubSpot admin and then like a separate Salesforce admin. And that's why I recommend on the last point, unify ownership of tools if you can. Have one person that sits over both. Or if you can't do that, make sure that your HubSpot admin and your Salesforce admin are best friends. Because it has happened too many times that I've seen where the Salesforce admin doesn't even remember, that you have this, workflow set up in HubSpot, and they go build something that totally wrecks all of your reports. Or they, forgot to realize if I change the formula field in Salesforce, that's going to totally mess up a report that you have in HubSpot. You've just got to make sure that you've got really solid, let's call it change management and planning inside your company for both tools. If you have the same person own both, great. Okay, let's start talking about some best practices. You guys have a ton of questions. I want to make sure we have time to hit on those, but I'm just going to run through some of these like more specific points that like I had to learn the hard way. And please take these and just don't learn from my mistakes. The first one is about resolving sync errors in the integration. So when you turn it on, you're going to get this beautiful page inside of HubSpot. When you click on the Salesforce integration, it will show you the sync errors. And there's 8 different types of sync errors you can get. There's really more than that, but they categorize them into 8 different ones. You need to check that regularly. Like most people, it's like, oh yeah, I'm just used to having, all integrations have a couple sync errors. I cannot tell you guys how many times I've walked into an org that let that go for, let's say, a year. Nobody cleaned up the sync errors. And as soon as I clean them up, we find dozens or hundreds of leads, people who submitted a form. They got captured inside of HubSpot. They were saying like, I've got my money in my hand. I want to give it to you. Please, 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 can I be a customer? But because there was some stupid sync error between the two tools, they never made it into Salesforce. And so the right person who was supposed to qualify that deal and do whatever never saw it. I'm telling you, that alone will save your company thousands of dollars by just making sure you have your sync errors in good shape. Someone needs to check those regularly. And the nice thing is on the HubSpot side, if you go in, there's a section where it's like, notify me of new sync errors, turn that on. You can set it up to go once a day. You can set it to be live as new ones pop up once a week, whatever, but make sure that you or whoever else is managing this is getting that and they are on top of it. The next one, make sure you have a specific HubSpot integration user. On the Salesforce side, right, you're gonna have this big old fat list of users. If you just use your personal email, your personal Salesforce user to connect and authenticate the two tools, it will work, but it will not be uncommon if you are not a system admin in Salesforce, you will start to get new sync errors. Like, oh, maybe all of a sudden there's this thing that it needed to sync to and it didn't have permissions. The other reason why I strongly recommend you do this is if you have, just like create, HubSpot at yourcompany.com, create that user in Salesforce and then use that to integrate. It makes it so much easier when you're trying to diagnose and track down, like, hey, how come, this field changed, or who changed, or who ran this automation, or who updated this record, or whatever. When you have that specific user, it is so much easier to diagnose problems, figure out what's going on. I can't emphasize that enough. Literally was working on this right before we hopped on the call for another client. All right, this is one, I don't know, sometimes people have weird opinions. I am 100% right on this, and you're totally wrong if you disagree. But do not sync your marketing email activity into Salesforce as tasks. It is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Just like, it looks okay on the HubSpot side. It's formatted. It's like designed to work this way. But the way that it pumps into Salesforce looks horrible. So if you have, let's say, 5 contacts on one account, and you send all 5 of those people a marketing email, and let's say that you have like opens and clicks and all of those wonderful things you want to track. Let's say you have those turned on. What will happen is that on the account level, immediately, it will start syncing like 5 different records to the activity timeline in Salesforce. And every open, every click, it rolls up to the account. So it doesn't take very long. If you send a weekly newsletter, let's say, it doesn't take very long for your activity timeline in Salesforce to become completely useless. This same client I just mentioned I was working on, Last week, he was like, I can't even see, you know, other emails being sent. I can't see meetings. All I see is just marketing email data. In the last year, you know, and they're not a big company at all. They had 138,000 tasks created in Salesforce to represent all this marketing email data. We cleaned up, just deleted those 138,000. And it was like, all of a sudden they knew exactly the history of their, you know, contact or their account or whatever. And they were thrilled. So just a heads up, if you can turn that off, great. I really do not see any reason why you need it, unless you have very weird, like we use marketing emails for this very specific reason or something. But I strongly suggest turning it off if it's like newsletters or, you know, product updates or something like that. You just don't need it syncing into Salesforce. If you really need that data, you can go back and get it in HubSpot. Okay, the next one, boy, I thought I didn't even have enough material. I'm running out of time. This next one we could spend forever on. Get rid of leads if you can. What I mean by that is inside of Salesforce, they have this idea of the leads object. And a lot of this goes back to the olden days of like 2008, okay? And back in those days, it was not super common to have account-based marketing strategies or account-based selling strategies, right? You'd be at some conference, you'd have some, you know, sales rep get his napkin out or get a business card or whatever and write down the information. All I know is that I got a name, maybe I got a phone number, and where did they work again? Oh yeah, maybe they said this place. That was a lead. And so the lead object in Salesforce serves as sort of this catch-all, a way to sort of make sure that whatever crappy data we got, it can come in and we'll figure out what to do with it later. You then have to manually convert a lead into an account and a contact or an opportunity as well. That can cause so many issues with duplicates, with data quality. I strongly recommend that if you have these two tools integrated, you basically stop using the lead object altogether. There's a setting where you can say kind of all new records coming in from HubSpot come in as an account and as a contact in a Salesforce. If you are B2B, if you are smart, I cannot think of any reason why you would want to keep the lead object. There are some businesses where it does make sense, right? In more of a B2C context, or, you know, there's maybe more unique ones where, you know, like a funeral home is like a good example. Like you kind of do need a lead object in that particular situation. But if you're selling software to other businesses, if you're selling anything to other businesses, there's a reason why HubSpot did not include that type of a lead object when they built their CRM tool. It is just kind of outdated. It doesn't work super well. It's messy. It's not great from like a data quality perspective. Okay, I got to pick up the pace. Okay, the next one, HubSpot campaigns, Salesforce campaigns. They are not the same thing. Don't think they're the same thing. You can't sync them in the HubSpot Salesforce integration. Salesforce campaigns are way more robust. They are way more customizable. They are, you know, typically used if you're wanting to do more in-depth reporting on, you know, maybe someone was this type of status in a campaign and then they transitioned to this, and then I need to drill down and I have all sorts of, you know, opportunity attribution data tied to it or whatever. HubSpot campaigns, it's kind of like I'm putting together assets or content and saying, this is part of this campaign. You obviously can do like inbound stuff as well. Salesforce campaigns are just way more robust. You get all sorts of custom fields. There's the campaign member object, which is also associated with it, which gives you some flexibility. But if you need to track campaigns inside of HubSpot, you just need to create a custom object. That's kind of your only option. Do not use the actual HubSpot campaign object. All right. If you have these two tools integrated, I would assume it's because you're using HubSpot for at least some form of marketing automation. If they are integrated, I strongly recommend that you push all data into HubSpot first and then sync it into Salesforce. The reason being is list uploads are 10 billion times easier inside of HubSpot if you've ever had to do a list upload into Salesforce. If you have like the instant enrich feature turned on inside of HubSpot, then you'll capture all of that data right out of the gate. Year founded, investor, blah, blah, blah. Plus, it just is really nice if you are saying, hey, the source of all new leads or prospects or whatever you want to call them, they come in through HubSpot. That's where you can run all of your attribution automation, lead distribution, anything that needs to happen when something is net new, and then push it into Salesforce when it's ready. I strongly recommend that approach. HubSpot workflows. I already mentioned this a little bit earlier. If you can use a HubSpot workflow for data cleanup, do it. Don't create some report in Salesforce, then export it as a CSV, edit the data, then upload it back into Salesforce. HubSpot workflows are awesome. You can turn them on and then turn them off, and you're done. I can't recommend that one enough. Next one is be very careful with mapping formula fields and calculated properties. So these things do not work how you might imagine. I have run into this multiple times where maybe someone built a formula field inside of Salesforce, right? And maybe that formula field references another object. So if you're on the contact, maybe it goes up to the account and it pulls something down to the contact. Let's say that changes, that formula field changes. That in and of itself will not trigger a sync back into HubSpot. And actually, this was a project that Brandon and I worked on together at Grow. We had at the contact level, like a formula field that connected to some of our product usage data. And it would tell us how many days it had been since somebody had last logged into our tool. And then what Brandon was doing was trying to set up like a nurture campaign inside of HubSpot, which would say, hey, if you haven't logged in 15 days, send them this email. We miss you. Come back. We love you, whatever. The problem we were running into is that was the only field that was getting updated on the contact. No one was going in and manually updating that contact record. And so we would pass 15 days. We'd get to 45. And then finally, when somebody manually updated the record in Salesforce, then it would sync the data into HubSpot. And it totally screwed this up. The workaround we built was that in Salesforce, I had some automation that just updated contacts once a day, all contacts. But the point is, don't try and map formula fields or calculated properties into either tool and expect them to be live unless you have something triggering regular updates. All right, I'm going to run through this so we have enough questions or enough time for questions at the end. In HubSpot, if somebody leaves your company, as quick as you can, transition the records to someone who is an active owner. The reason being is HubSpot will stop syncing with Salesforce if the record is owned by an inactive user. So, the tools independently, it's like, whatever, you can see so-and-so used to own this, not a big deal. It becomes a big deal if you have an account, let's say, that's owned by inactive user A, and something really important happens on that account, a form gets submitted, whatever. If there's a sync error on that, you're not going to know. So I just strongly recommend you've got to stay on top of records owned by inactive users, or you're going to have a ton of sync errors and missing data that will cause you heartache down the road. All right, next one is they have brand new, HubSpot released some brand new Visualforce pages that you can put into Salesforce. I actually built some of these on my own before because they used to be super janky and not great. But basically, it gives you an iframe inside of Salesforce. You can see what is going on in HubSpot. You can look at workflows. You can look at like recent, property updates inside of HubSpot, whatever. And it works for the account, lead, contact, and opportunity objects. Literally, all you have to do is on the HubSpot side, just make sure that you have I think there's a little thing that says update the HubSpot Visualforce page or whatever. And then in Salesforce, make sure you have the most recent HubSpot package installed. And then you just go into the Lightning record page and you can pull that, put it wherever you want. I love it. I really, really love it. One of the questions I saw was like, how do you have teams using both tools? This is one of the ways that you solve that. All right. The next one is document where your automation lives. I kind of mentioned this before. You are playing Russian roulette if you just build a workflow in HubSpot that affects fields that are mapped to Salesforce, and you're not sure the implications of what happens in Salesforce. If you just turn that on, who freaking knows what will happen? And the same thing goes vice versa. I always love to say that Salesforce consultants are some of the dumbest, but dumbest smart people that you've ever met. They will be so smart. They will spend all this time building this beautiful flow in the sandbox. They'll validate it. They'll test it. They'll do all of that. And then once they push it into production, the part that's actually integrated with HubSpot, then havoc is wreaked because nobody realized the implications it had on the workflow in HubSpot. So just be super careful there. The next one is with duplicates. I saw someone had a question there. If you clean up a duplicate in HubSpot or in Salesforce, it may come back to life. And the reason is you've got to do it in this exact right order, or one tool will think, oh, something's weird. Your record's missing. Let me just bring it back for you. And it'll push it back into the other one. And then the same thing goes with in Salesforce, you may have really good duplicate rules like, oh, if the email is the same or if this or whatever. If you don't have the same thing set up in HubSpot, then you're going to flood your system with sync errors. And then the last one is validation rules. Because of the integration, I actually avoid building validation rules in Salesforce if at all possible. I try to just use like screen flows or something where I can control input. But if you use validation rules in Salesforce, and then you try to update a record on the HubSpot side that would break that validation rule, HubSpot will let you do it. HubSpot says, go right ahead, save the record, we're all good. But it then will break the sync and you'll run into issues. So I just want to make sure that's like super clear, like validation rules used sparingly and very carefully. Okay, I'm going to jump really quick to some of these resources, and then maybe we can spend the last bit with questions. This will go out in the slides that we're going to send out. I have a couple things that I use all the time to make sure this integration is good. I have a couple blog posts I've written, a lot of the same stuff I talked about, but with like images and links and things like that to help you guide you through it. I have 2 unmanaged packages. So they're nothing fancy, nothing special, but I have 2 unmanaged packages. One is a basics sort of for your Salesforce HubSpot integration. You install it on the Salesforce side, and it will give you some basic fields on the account, on the contact, on the op, on the deal, or on the lead. Things like HubSpot record ID, things like last Salesforce sync time, things that make it easier from the Salesforce side to see if stuff is syncing or not. Give you a little dashboard to see if your record is good or not. The other one is specifically for Marketing Hub. And this is one of the things that drives me crazy, is inside of HubSpot, you're getting tons of rich, beautiful data that has, you know, first page seen, last page seen, the time of that, all sorts of wonderful things. None of that shows up in Salesforce unless you manually create a field and then map it into Salesforce. And if you have most of your reporting based out of Salesforce, then you miss out on so much of that. And it like oftentimes makes marketing look way less valuable than they actually are. So this one, it literally is 43 fields for the contact, 43 fields for the lead, and then like 20 fields for the account. It just pulls in, it just creates a corresponding field in Salesforce to match up with all of these auto-enriched marketing fields, marketing properties on the HubSpot side. And then you just go in and sync them. Last thing is, I created a GPT inside of ChatGPT. I made it read every single help article that I could find about this integration. Plus, you know, what it knows. It is so useful to me now because I don't have to go look for the help article when this particular error happens or when I get this message. It is so honed in on this integration. And you can just add it. If you have a ChatGPT account, you can just add it in as a GPT for you to use. It saved myself and my team tons and tons of time. All right. Sorry, that was way longer than I initially thought it would be. Let me go back to our question slide, and I think this will be a great time to jump into some of those. All right, 1 second.
That was really good. Love the strong opinions. I think we might have some objections. That's, you know, the great thing about it, you know, like using the contact object, or, you know, basically like foregoing the lead object. You know, I think there's a lot of people that have thoughts on that. Using like syncing email data in. Salesforce consultants are dummies. That's pretty good.
No, they're like the smartest idiots you've ever met.
Right.
As one, I can say. Right?
Dude, that's great. Thank you for putting that together. I know, like, we basically have the same amount of people hanging out that we had when we first started. So I think you've captured everyone's attention and, you know, hit on a lot of things that, you know, that are super imperative to getting these two systems to work correctly. You know, the thing that I'll add in is like, you have to be, or the thing that I want to reemphasize is like, you have to be in the details with this on a field by field, object by object, process by process level. Like there's no detail that can be overlooked. The other thing that I'll reemphasize in 13 years of getting these two to play in the same pit together nicely is the sync errors in HubSpot. Like as a marketing director, there's nothing more terrifying to me than like the idea that my precious MQLs might not be syncing into Salesforce because they're stuck in some like dedupe, or they're missing like some key piece of information. So, you know, when I've been a CRM admin, that's something that I check on a daily basis. I don't necessarily clear all of them on a daily basis, but if it's like a priority queue, like I get in there. So we do have a bunch of questions, and we will crank through as many of those as we can in the next 10 minutes. If anyone wants to stick around, we usually bleed over a little bit. We'll keep the recording going as long as we can. But we're going to go in the order of votes. And you kind of you dance around this one there at the end. But Carrie asks, how do you handle duplicate accounts when you've got Salesforce and HubSpot merged up, or sorry, connected, and HubSpot doesn't let you do a merge from within that platform? What do you recommend there?
That one, I remember the first time I saw that, I like took it personally. Like, to me, it feels like HubSpot is just like trying to make your life painful for integrating with Salesforce. But that's exactly what happens is if you turn that on and you go into what you're used to, where you go into the, company page or contacts page, and you want to kind of handle duplicates, you go to click merge and it says, sorry, you're not allowed to if the Salesforce integration is installed. Long story short, I'll tell you the super quick manual way how to do it, and then I'll tell you the smart way. Short way is you need to merge it in Salesforce first. So if it's an account, merge it in Salesforce first. I like to give it like 5 minutes or so to rest. Then I go into HubSpot. Hopefully what that will have done is moved any contacts and activities that were associated with one of those companies to the one. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, right? Maybe depends on the sync errors you may have, depends on all sorts of things. And then what you have to do is you have to delete, like manually delete, sacrifice on the altar, the one that didn't make it. And then you need to move manually anything else. The other reason I really hate doing this is it's very common if you have like marketing email history or activity data inside of HubSpot, it sometimes doesn't make it over to the new one that survived. So that's the manual way to do it. I don't recommend it necessarily, but you do need to do it in that order. If you try and do it on the HubSpot side first, it will come back to life. But it will come back to life with crappy data, right? So I strongly recommend doing it that way. The smart way to do it, and I should be like sponsored by them or something, is InCycle. They're just, I actually hate their, like I'm not sponsored by them. I don't have any affiliation. I hate their user interface personally, but they are the best deduping tool if you use both HubSpot and Salesforce, and they're relatively cheap. They just, I don't know if they intentionally did this or not, but they have built it in a way where it's way more straightforward on, you just merge the Salesforce side first, then it's very easy to merge the HubSpot side, and it moves over the contacts, it moves over the activity. It does it all in a really quick, smart way. Plus you can build the rules to just keep it going. It's like a couple $100. I can't remember. I think it has to do with like how much volume you have. But like, honestly, what I tend to do with it is like, I'll buy it for a month, and they're like dumb enough to let you do month to month. I'll buy it for a month. I'll clean everything up, and then I'll turn it off, and then I'll try to just manually stay on top of it. If it gets out of control again, I'll buy it again for another month and whatever.
Yeah, InCycle, I'll second that one. It's INSYCLE. We try to be like a no pitch zone here at the HubSpot user group, but it's a good tool, and you can have it scanning and deduping and merging across a number of platforms. So yeah, second, and there's a bunch of other stuff that they've added to it. Yeah, I rely on that one heavily. Yeah, I mean, there's not an easy answer to it outside of a tool or a super manual like process, and you're probably going to lose data, which again, coming from a marketing perspective, is just heartbreaking. But as long as, one thing with HubSpot, as long as your contact attribution, like your original sources, as long as those are in order, HubSpot should follow suit based on the first created contact as far as like your original source field and maintaining your latest sources. So, but you will lose some historical data. The next question is for me, and it's kind of a broad one, but like, do you have just any general thoughts about when you get teams that work out of Salesforce and you get teams that work out of HubSpot? And I mean specifically like CRM-centric teams, sales teams, where one example would be AEs that primarily operate out of Salesforce, but you have like a SDR or BDR team that operates out of HubSpot. Like, how do you manage that? Have you seen that? Like, do you have any sort of like best practices or approaches to that sort of setup?
Yeah. I like always underestimate like how much a salesperson can screw up your CRM. Like I always think it's so intuitive to use and easy to use, and they will always find a way to create an error. So I used to like really preach, like, guys, there is a way to use both as a sales rep and get like fantastic data. It's like, oh, do this part of the, qualification process in HubSpot, then move over to Salesforce and do X, Y, and Z. My, experience has just been give them one tool and try not to force them to use both if you can help it. There may be some situations where you need to. The problem with that is HubSpot just released like this month a brand new, like it's their Chrome extension. It now will actually load, if you're in Salesforce, if you install this Chrome extension, it'll load like on the right third of your screen, basically the corresponding HubSpot record. So you could enroll it in a sequence, you could enroll it in a workflow, you could do all sorts of stuff. While you have the Salesforce record open here, you have the HubSpot version of it here. Again, I think that works well if you have like a super clean, super well-designed CRM on both sides. But again, I just never underestimate like how much they can screw things up when they're clicking around. So like, just be careful with that approach. I tend to just recommend, hey, marketing, obviously, let's just keep them in HubSpot unless they absolutely need to go into Salesforce. And I tend to recommend BDRs stay, like BDR, SDR roles stay in HubSpot. And then, let's say that the qualification is when that op gets created. I tend to just use automation there. So they do whatever they need to on the HubSpot side to qualify a lead. The deal or the opportunity will then get created and then synced over. And then I tend to recommend that your AE sort of picks it up in Salesforce at that point. But that allows for like a super simple process. Plus it's way easier when you need to train. It's like, oh, I don't need to train you in 2 different tools and log in here and do this and do that. So I tend to recommend keeping, let's call it pre-opportunity in HubSpot, and then post-opportunity creation. If you're going to use both tools, keep that in Salesforce.
Got you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm curious to see if, as HubSpot is beginning to move toward seat-based pricing, I'm curious if that feels like it could, based on their model, and we still don't know a lot about it, but it could drive a pretty big wedge into companies that use both. Like, hey, I don't want to pay for my BDR team to have, 8 licenses in Salesforce and 8 licenses in HubSpot. Pick a lane. And some companies may even say, like, we're going to pick a CRM and that's it. Like, no more overlapping. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves.
Hey, before we go to that next question, can we
go ahead.
Do the stop share screen just so we can see us all?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Back to you, Brandon.
Well, Doc, do you want to do like just a very quick recap or next steps before we go to the overtime, just for people that have to bail
out? Yeah. So if anybody here has to leave, I'm going to go ahead and drop in, because I promised I would, a link to register for our intensive that we're doing, or our lunch and learn. Give me 2 seconds. I'm putting that in the chat right now. If anybody is interested in jumping into that, go ahead and get yourself registered. Otherwise, we will announce that. This will be from 12 to 1 p.m. on February 23rd. And then hopefully we'll have another one again in March.
And last thing I'll say for those that need to jump, I should have mentioned this in the beginning. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I post a lot of HubSpot Salesforce integration insights and mostly memes. But go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn if you haven't already. It's just Tate Stone. Anybody that wants to discuss it, talk about it, would love to continue the conversation on LinkedIn.
For sure, and thanks to everyone for coming. It's great to see a good turnout. Always good to get the hug together, meet new people, and talk about super nerdy topics like this. All right, let's keep going through the questions for the people that are sticking around.
Overtime.
Yeah, officially in overtime.
So if you do have to leave, we will be recording, and we'll have you can always come back and watch them later. But I'd love to have you stick around.
Yeah. Thanks for sticking around, those of you that are. And thank you to my internet for getting its crap together. All right, Tate. Lindsay asked, what are best practices for connecting campaigns and forms between HubSpot and Salesforce?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe I'll break that out separately. When it comes to forms, I tend to recommend that you go into the activity sync in the integration and set it up so that form submissions make it into Salesforce's tasks. Then in Salesforce, you'll see the task. It'll give you this, form name, the comments, whatever they put in there. But I think if you're coming from the HubSpot perspective, you're sort of used to the idea of grouping things more like assets and content and forms together in a campaign. They just don't work like that in Salesforce. A campaign really is more like a very broad, sort of general, like whole container almost. Like think about it where it's like, I've got leads, I've got contacts. I don't really know a whole ton of what's going on. I'm just going to dump people into this big grouping that I can then later clean up, build reports off of, automation, et cetera. So they don't quite work the same. They don't, like on the Salesforce side, there's not like out of the box reporting or insights necessarily like you would get with a HubSpot campaign. So if you need like this perfect one-to-one sync, I tend to see it's because you've got maybe some requirements that reporting needs to come out of Salesforce and you need to use campaigns. And I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but what I tend to recommend is you go ahead and build like a custom object in HubSpot, and you can call that Salesforce campaign or something like that. And you can go ahead and, build a one-to-one version of it if you need to, but I tend to avoid that if I can. And actually, the Salesforce HubSpot integration provides you some kind of cool things inside of the workflow builder in HubSpot. So you can go in and you can enroll people into Salesforce campaigns based on whatever triggers and criteria you want inside of HubSpot. So if you want, let's say a form specific campaign, you just want to care about anybody that's ever filled out this form, or, whatever criteria you think of, it's an event, it's a, broad Google Ads campaign, it's whatever it is that you're trying to measure. Think about it in terms of a marketing effort, right? Something that you put some time and effort into, you need to measure and track. I tend to recommend building the triggers for all of that in HubSpot actually, and then pushing that into Salesforce campaigns that you've previously created. And then you set the statuses accordingly so that, yes, you will probably need to go look at the campaign reporting in Salesforce to get what you need. But like once you've built that out on the HubSpot side, it just kind of maintains itself.
I think there's a path we could go down here that is, probably more than this meeting can handle. Or that we can cover in the next like 10 minutes of overtime, about like a campaign structure in Salesforce with like parent, child, grandparent that represents sort of the holistic approach to looking at marketing, and using HubSpot to plug people into the like very precise child, grandchild, or whatever, and how forms and workflows and those things interact with it. But yeah, that's a big topic, and creating like we might have to have you back at it, or this is maybe a good small group topic to sort of like, how do you do revenue reporting when you have this layer of marketing sitting in HubSpot and this layer that's more like person and account based in Salesforce? Like, how do you create something holistic, and ideally in a perfect world where someone like an executive only has to go into one dashboard.
Right.
Good luck with that. All right, we did have one submitted ahead of time from Monica that I think is interesting, because this is something that I haven't heard of. Do you have any feedback, best practices, tips and tricks on using HubSpot with the Salesforce Nonprofit Success Pack, which is a free which is like a free add-on for nonprofits in Salesforce, but it sounds like it might be a pain in the rear. So, do you have any experience with that, Tate?
Yeah, the problem with that particular add-on is it treats, so like the traditional Salesforce model I talked about, you have like accounts, you have leads, contacts, right? In this nonprofit version, you more heavily lean on what they call like person accounts, which it's almost like I don't ever even want to tell someone how it works, because it just ruins your perspective of what an account is forever. But basically the idea is you have an individual person who maybe is a contact, but also an account, right? Whatever you're going to call that. And you can name these, kind of whatever you want. The labels can change a little bit on the nonprofit side. But it does make that integration really complicated with HubSpot because it's just used to this idea of like companies, contacts, and then the activities that go in between them. So I've only had to do this once, thankfully. And if you want help, please find somebody else. I'm not going to do it. But what I learned was you just got to really think about it like contacts and contacts. And then, what you're doing on the HubSpot side with companies, avoid using it if you can. And again, most of this is because they're looking for like donors, right? And it's like trying to track donors that have over time done X, Y, or Z. They just don't have as much like, we're selling to all of these companies and they're going to buy our nonprofit thing or whatever. So that's why it gets a little bit complicated, but basically you've just got to have really good contact modeling in both tools.
But go somewhere else to get help with it. Don't come to Tate. I love it. Hopefully, Monica, that's helpful as you watch this in the future. All right, let's do another one from Daniel. How robust is the sync of custom objects? This is a good one from Salesforce into HubSpot. They have 2 projects and project roles, and are wondering if they would be able to utilize them in HubSpot. Projects are related to companies, and project roles tie context to those. This is a good topic. I don't know that you spent a whole lot of time on it in your presentation, but and something that's relatively newish to HubSpot, like in the last 3 or 4 years.
Exactly. So yeah, if you asked this question a while ago, I would just be like, hey, you can bring over a custom object into HubSpot on like a one-to-one basis, but a custom object that's related to another custom object, that's where you're going to run into issues. And so HubSpot, even prior to this, had fairly limited abilities to do that. And it's been, I think even in the last 6 months, they rolled out that recent update where you can customize association labels and things like that, which are really nice. But the way HubSpot looks at associating records, if you're used to Salesforce, it functions a whole lot more like an opportunity contact role, if you're familiar with that. So instead of like a field on the record, which is called like parent account or something like that, which they do have, right? But instead of like a custom lookup field on one record that directly links to another, the way it works in HubSpot sort of naturally is using like associations, right? So you would associate this record to this record. And that's why it's way more flexible on HubSpot's side to say like, oh, this contact could be associated to 3 companies, right? And you could identify like, oh, they're related to their primary company because they work there, but they're related to this other company because they are the partner on this deal or something like that, right? And you could just tie the associations that way. So if you've got one that's like projects and project roles or something like that, it's a little bit tricky because you don't have like a perfect one-to-one control in the integration of that to be able to say like, hey, if the lookup field is populated with this Salesforce record and you map that over, then it will like auto create an association. You could probably try and figure something out with like Ops Hub to kind of handle that. I mean, maybe with just the normal workflow, but it's not crazy easy to do. So if you are syncing custom objects from Salesforce into HubSpot, I tend to just make sure that you have, like, if you need cross object information on it, build the formula field in Salesforce. So you're pulling in maybe just one of those 2 objects, like maybe just do like the project roles or something, pull those in and then pull all the parent project data into that. And then you can associate just one of those to like, let's say contacts or something like that. Or if you're using tickets or something. So I tend to recommend like keeping it as a one-to-one if possible, but when you're starting to do cross object, it gets kind of tricky.
Yeah, again, another one that we could probably spend an entire, session on. Okay, I think there's a couple of people that want to have it out on leads versus contacts. Before we do that, I'm going to be selfish and ask my question first, because I don't know, we might spend another 2 hours having the lead versus context discussion. My question is, is there like something better than the native HubSpot and Salesforce integration? Like, is it better to use some other kind of iPaaS tool, maybe MuleSoft, whatever, or is the answer something in between, or like both? Use the native integration that HubSpot and Salesforce have built together, plus, I don't know, Zapier or whatever. Like, what are your thoughts on the actual like integration tool?
Yeah, I would say it's gotten a lot better. So they had a big update on it like a year ago or so. And it's way more robust. So things that you couldn't do previously where, like, let's say you had an email record in Salesforce that originated and was created in Salesforce. There wasn't a super easy way to sync that into HubSpot as an email, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've now got more of a bi-directional sync on activities, and you can kind of customize the fields on them where you really couldn't do that before. It's actually kind of one of the few places in HubSpot where you can customize how like meeting fields come in, which is annoying. But anyway, so the out-of-the-box integration has made great strides. For probably 80% of people, 90% of people, it's good enough. And if you just tinker around with it, you can, like, people are pretty smart. You can come up with some pretty cool workarounds on how stuff works. Occasionally you just have to do stuff where it's like some, like the example I gave with you, Brandon, right? Where it was like, we needed that product usage data to kind of show up in HubSpot a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Literally all I did was on the Salesforce side, and ping me if you need this, but I have a script that it's like an Apex script, but basically what it does is there's a field on the contact called like forced sync date. And once a day, my script just runs through and it stamps the current date time, and it's mapped into HubSpot. So when that gets updated, it forces a sync and then pushes all of the related formula stuff into HubSpot. So that's just like one example. If you get creative, you'll probably be okay. Zapier is a lifesaver occasionally. Like, I would say anything that maybe you're getting into custom object territory or something funky with campaigns that you need to have happen, that's probably your best bet. But like, I rarely even need to go down that path. Like, the HubSpot workflow engine is just super awesome, super robust. The field mappings are great. The one thing, and actually David Asvig mentioned this to me the other day, just separately. He was the person who presented last time. There are a few limitations on this integration, which I don't know why I put this in the presentation. This is the most valuable part of the whole thing, but there are a few mappings you cannot customize between the two tools. Contact owner is one, right? Some basic stuff like that. They have to be a two-way sync, have to. Opportunity and deal owner has to. You don't get any, options there. That can be like devastating though, right? Like, what if you build all of this security stuff in Salesforce, all of this validation stuff, but then some rando marketing intern who's 19 just go clicks some button in HubSpot and flips 100,000 owners. I've seen it done, and people get very upset. So what I tend to recommend on that particular issue, and then I'll come back to answering your question, is you can build, this is where I do accept validation rules. You can build validation rules that if you have this integration user I told you to set up, if contact owner is changed by HubSpot integration user, HubSpot@company.com, don't let it happen. Stop it. It will create some sync errors, but at least your data is safe, right? So that was just one. I can't believe I didn't mention that. Sorry to the people that left early. I'm sure you'll be suffering forever because of that. But coming back to the other, I guess, broader question, you can get away with just using the out-of-the-box integration. It is getting better. HubSpot is the one that maintains it. Like, you don't really think about it that way, but it is 100% built by HubSpot. Salesforce has done absolutely nothing to support that integration. It's just using kind of out-of-the-box APIs from Salesforce. So HubSpot, if you believe in like what they're trying to do and make the user experience better, I had a conversation with Kyle Jepsen about this like a year ago or so. And I was like, if you don't do something about this integration, if you guys don't, like, nothing will happen. And I think from their perspective, they, like, my argument was why you should care about this HubSpot is there's a lot of people who just can't, even if they want to get rid of HubSpot, they can't.
Right.
They still want to use, or if they want to get rid of Salesforce, they can't. They still want to use HubSpot. And so I strongly recommend to those, like, to HubSpot, like, build an integration then that doesn't force churn. Build one that allows the two tools to coexist. And I think that's the path that they've taken. Salesforce, on the other hand, like, they won't even mention HubSpot's name. Like, my partner rep on the Salesforce side, if I ever even say HubSpot, it's like, why wouldn't you use Pardot? And I'm like, well, you've never used Pardot. But anyway, like, that's the one thing that maybe kind of considers. HubSpot is the one that manages that integration. They built the package that you install into Salesforce. Salesforce has done nothing to help. So HubSpot is the one where go, submit and on the community and upvote ideas that you see and things like that. Because HubSpot actually is fairly responsive, and a lot of my biggest complaints with it have been addressed.
That's really good. I didn't know that. I thought it was more of a collaboration because, I mean, in general, and I think if I can summarize some of what you just said, like, it works pretty well doing what it does. They've improved it over the years, but in general, like, don't try to outsmart it. Like, let it do what it's designed to do, and you can sort of supplement things here and there with like a Zapier if you need to, but otherwise, HubSpot's done a pretty good job of being a good partner to Salesforce, even though, they're very much and increasingly becoming competitors.
The only thing I would say is not so much from an automation perspective, but one thing I have seen is like from a data perspective. And this is why I built that one package I mentioned earlier, where you bring over all of those marketing hub properties into Salesforce. Those don't automatically map. And so the only like gap I would see in the current integration is if you have to build your reporting in Salesforce, most people don't even realize you can do something about it. And so they just kind of sit there and shrug their shoulders and tell the boss, like, sorry, we can't get this particular data in Salesforce. And then they feel like they've got to go buy some other tool that has an integration into both. And then you're trying to build some like merged combined data set of both CRMs. And that's like a mess in and of itself. So I would say that's like the only spot where if like you are running into reporting issues, you may need to get like a third party tool. Like if you're just like, I only want to use HubSpot reporting, I only want to use HubSpot or Salesforce reporting, you may run into some limitations, but if you're smart about it, you can get around most of them.
Gotcha. All right, last thing, and then we'll call this one a wrap. I know there's a bunch of questions in there. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them.
Just message me on LinkedIn. If you got a question, message me on LinkedIn. More than happy to talk about it.
Tate, maybe we can pass these over to you, and you can reach out to people and tell them what you think. All right, let's just talk for a second about leads versus contacts, because this is controversial. I'm curious, without spending half an hour on it, just what is your, like, why this approach? How do you handle like lead to account matching? How do you handle, like, how do you recommend that? How do you handle orphaned records? Like, are you okay with orphaned records? How do you handle those? And like, why, I don't know, why move away from it? And what's so bad about the lead object? Defend yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So the reason I don't like it is very quickly you can start having data quality and duplicate issues. Like even if you're not even integrated with HubSpot, let's just say you're just using Salesforce. It doesn't take long for one person to come through again. Maybe it's a year later, maybe it's a month later, maybe it's whatever. If that person has already been converted from a lead into a contact and an account, when they come through the second time, depending on how you have it set up, they may get a brand new lead record created. So now you have an already converted contact and account, which maybe that's what the rep owns. It's in their territory. That's what they're watching, whatever. And then this lead comes in. Or maybe even worse, you have someone from the same company come in, but because they're a lead, they're not out of the box associated with the right company. And so you have one sales process happening over here and a separate one over here, because one got round robin here, one got round robin there. And so even if you're just going to only use Salesforce, at the very least, you do have to implement like some sort of lead to account matching. So I have like an unmanaged package. I didn't think to advertise it here, but I have one I use for that. Where basically you just take the email or the website on the lead, you format it into just the domain, right? So instead of www.whatever, it would just be revblack.com. From the email, from the website, if you can find a corresponding account to match it with that already exists in there, great. Go ahead and associate the lead. And I recommend auto converting it. And I have like a script if you need it. I can help get to that to you, but automatically convert that. So if I own an account and I know I have to take care of this account, that I know that this contact or lead is going to go to the right person. That's kind of the biggest concern. If you don't do that and you just get this big, huge, fat list of leads, you freaking better have a team of people who go through that list like daily and regularly and scrub it. I had one client who just like loved the lead object. They were a huge company. They had a team, I kid you not, of like 100 people in Mexico. They had this whole office just for them. Literally, they're 100 people. They were just going through leads. They had like 72 different product lines. It was whatever. But all they ever did was just go through leads, look for duplicates, manually merge them. Yeah, and it was kind of a mess. So it's one of those where I just don't recommend it. It gets even worse than if you try to associate, if you install, if you integrate HubSpot and Salesforce, because if you build a property on, like, let's say on the contact object in HubSpot, you build a brand new property called birthday or something, whatever. The lead object in Salesforce then needs to have a corresponding field to it. And so does the contact. Or what can happen is, let's say you only build it on the lead object, you forgot to build it on the contact. When you convert that lead, it loses that data forever. And then you have it, let's say in HubSpot still, but there's nowhere for it to go on the contact. So then what you have to do is basically constantly check, do I have the same custom properties on the lead object that I do on the contact object? Like, are they okay? Do they work? And then you've got to make sure that the mapping is right. The API names need to be exactly the same. And again, just on the Salesforce side, independent of HubSpot, let's say you need to build a report that's like contacts, I don't know, they received an email in the last 30 days. Like, you've got to build that report twice, once for leads and once for contacts, because they're separate objects. So it's this huge pain in the butt of trying to manage, like, did the sales team follow up? Did they not? Well, some of their stuff are leads. Some of their stuff is contacts. People get around that with the campaign member object sometimes because it allows you to kind of pull that. But then you've got to build another custom field that pulls that data up into the campaign member object.
I'm curious how you handle, and this was another one of the questions, I'm curious how you handle like statuses. Because like with the lead object, you have pretty clear, if you imagine like the lead status being sort of that area between like in life cycle stages, like a lead and an SQL, like reaching out or marketing nurture or unqualified, whatever that may be. Like, how do you handle that from like a company perspective where that lead status is gone?
Right. It depends on your business, right? So if like your accounts on average have like 400 contacts associated with them, this is a huge problem, right? And that's where leads are somewhat nice because it's like, oh, I can just kind of look at the new leads and I don't need to sort through all of it. But if you're like, no, we've got, 1 to 10 contacts on an account at any given time, what I tend to recommend doing is you can build basically a checkbox on the contact object. And I like to call it like sales contact ? Right? And if they have come in through HubSpot, if they have come in through anything that I deem like what I would traditionally call a lead, they filled out a form, they signed up for an event, they did blah, 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 blah. I check that box as a sales contact. Anything else that gets added in there, like maybe someone's got their email connected to Salesforce, and so it just auto-populates contacts from whatever, the box is not checked for them. They don't show up. Just the people who have done something where they raised their hand, expressed interest, whatever. And then what I do is I just rebuild literally like whatever you would have like your lead statuses. I just build that on the contact object, and then I conditionally hide it or show it based on if they are a sales contact or not. And then they can just, I give them a little screen flow. I give them a little button in Salesforce so it works exactly the same way. Or I can just map to like lead status and like on the contact object in HubSpot if that's where it's getting updated. And then once they hit a certain lead status, let's call it SQL, that's when we can create an op. We can do it automatically, or I can have like in Salesforce a screen flow that will pop up, and you'll just go ahead and put in opportunity details, hit create. The other reason I like doing that is you can then like add automation to add like opportunity contact roles if that's super important for you or whatever. But it gives you a lot more control over it. With humongous giant organizations where you've got 400 contacts on an account, that may be tricky, but I doubt this is like your number one concern if you have like accounts that large.
Right. Well, I think we should call it a wrap there. Super interesting, Tate. Thank you a ton. Especially beside your knowledge, like you bring strong opinions, and I think everyone appreciates that. Like have have a take and, stand behind it, defend it. And, the fun thing about not fun thing about these two systems is like, there's no textbook approach. There are, kind of how it's designed out of the box, but if you want to hack around that and create a better path for your organization, then you can. So yeah, everyone, welcome to, please connect with Tate directly. Connect with Doc and I if you have interest in like hug things or have a topic that you want us to dig into. Doc, do you want to take us out? Thanks for coming, everyone. So good to see everybody.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I really appreciate everybody showing up, and a few of us who stayed through the entire overtime. Really do appreciate you guys. Tate, thank you so much. And yeah, we definitely could probably just have a literal Salesforce / HubSpot user group that could just meet on a weekly basis too. So with that being said, I want to thank everybody for showing up. I'm gonna go ahead and click stop record right now. Have a great day.